Hey everybody, Coach Stacy Lynn here. Today I'm going to talk about Candace Owens and some of the gaslighting that's been going on. And you may be surprised at what I'm going to share, and you might be wondering, why am I going to talk about this on my coaching channel? So I'm going to tell you a couple of things. If you're brand new, I want to introduce myself. Hello, I'm Coach Stacy Lynn. I'm a certified master Christian life coach, and I actually have a background as a therapist. And I've been in the media for over 20 years doing Christian political commentary. A couple of years ago, my Bible News Radio channel was banned by YouTube. And recently they reinstated it after 3 years off the air. I had to redirect my whole life after they did that. And they banned me because they felt like it. This is the bottom line. They actually came back and they told me, oh, we're sorry if we caused you any inconvenience. What they did was they actually banned conservative Christians, among other people, during the Biden administration. So anyway, all that to say that I have commentary in my life, in my background. And I have 20 plus years talking about issues in the media. And so it's part of who I am to talk about these things. I haven't talked a lot about politics or things like that on this channel, but I have talked a little bit about spiritual abuse and the crisis in the church. You know, I talked about the Daystar issues. I've talked about, John MacArthur, all of the people that we know who've been, complicit in allowing abuse or literally abusing people. And so part of what I specialize in when I'm coaching people is I'm helping them to deal with spiritual abuse, help them understand narcissistic abuse and how spiritual leaders use these particular things, and understanding things like gaslighting and other things like that. Well, long story short, I've been doing a lot of coaching, and this year has been tough for a lot of people. I run a very small nonprofit. This year, we have literally brought in $8,500 this whole year, okay? And I know, you're like, wow, really, that much? I know I actually have friends who bring that in a month, for what they do. But I really have a heart for ministry, and I hate fundraising. I mean, that's the bottom line. Pretty much anybody who runs a nonprofit hates fundraising. I have a really solid little base of 8 people who donate monthly, who actually provide the bare minimum expenses for me to keep all the things I need running. And this year, my goal was to end the year with $20,000, but I actually see that we could probably do 10, and I'm about $1,000 short. I'm just being completely honest here. So here's what I want to offer you. And then let's talk about Candace. What I want to offer until the end of the year is anybody who would like to do a coaching session with me, up to three coaching sessions. I want you to email me at this email address right here. I know it's fancy, isn't it? It's coachme@use.startmail.com. Okay, I'm going to put it in the description below. I want you to email me there, and I want you to say, I'm interested in being coached. Until the end of the year, I am willing to do coaching for a donation of any amount to my ministry, Heart Tug. And here's why: because I want to meet that goal. I have expenses, especially in December, and I know that some people can't afford my sliding scale, which starts at $75 a session and goes up to $150. That's very reasonable. And what I'm going to tell you is my skill set actually would be way over 200 if I actually charged with all my education and skill set. So this is a deal, and I want to help you. And if you want 3 sessions, you message me. If you want 2 sessions or 1, message me. We'll meet on Zoom or we'll meet on the phone, because I know some of you don't want to get on Zoom. All right? Deal? You help me, I can help you. And we will grow together, and that is my offer to you for the end of the year. Here's the other thing. I want to bring up Candace Owens. And the reason I want to bring her up right now is because she has been all over the place on social media, and her show not too long ago hit #1 in the podcast category, okay? #1 podcast in the world. Now let me tell you something. That doesn't just happen if you're a crackpot, all right? And that's how people are, what's the right word? They're calling her that, right? They're basically saying, oh, she's crazy, blah, blah, etc. Yada, yada, yada. Candace Owens is nuts. She's an anti-Semite, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and before all of you out there think, oh my gosh, Stacy, you believe her, blah, blah, blah. Let me just listen. Just listen to what I'm going to say, because that's why I gave you my credentials ahead of time, okay? Here is what I know. The Christian right is completely corrupt. I know that for a fact, okay? I know it for a fact. Here's what I also know. The Christian left is also corrupt, right? Here's what I know. All media, generally speaking, is completely corrupt. But the issue at hand here is that Charlie Kirk was murdered. Some people call it martyrdom. Some people call it an assassination. Frankly, I don't think the use of the word assassination is appropriate in this manner. He wasn't a politician or anything. He was, for crying out loud, a guy that went to college campuses and debated people. That's all he did, okay? And he had his thumb on the youth, which is a great thing. Really, he was young enough to be my kid, so that tells you how old I am. And I'm proud of my age, by the way. In fact, if you want to go to my old Bible News Radio channel that was just reinstated, you can go look at my hair. It used to be a lot darker. Now it's a lot lighter. Anyway. So if you've been in social media for a long time, then you understand that what we're taught and what we are shown is not always the truth, right? And that's what mainstream media hates now, because even when you're looking at the pastors who've been busted for abusing people, they're all upset because how dare people like Julie Roys and others call out these people and expose stuff. I mean, before even Daystar, right? All these people, they're like covered because they got millions and billions of dollars. They can do whatever they want. They can silence and squish the little person without money. But when you have a whole bunch of people rising up and saying, wait just a second, what the heck is the evidence here? Then these people start getting scared, right? And they start gaslighting. And this is what I actually think is happening with Candace Owens. I think she's being gaslighted. And I say this as a, quote, Zionist. I did a video yesterday about why I celebrate Hanukkah. Okay? I love doing that, by the way. That was such a fun video to make. I celebrate Hanukkah because without Hanukkah, there wouldn't have been Christmas. And Hanukkah was essentially the desecration of the Jewish temple. And God doing a miracle by allowing the oil the lights to be lit for a week, 8 days, I think. So, that was a miracle. But in today's media, we have a lot of things that we have to be careful about. AI, deep fakes. I will tell you that I had a woman on my program. I'm not going to bother telling you her name because I don't want to get struck again. But I talked about the George Floyd thing with this woman who was skeptical about what happened. And it turned out she was right. And I got struck on my Bible News Radio channel for bringing it up, right? This was way before everybody else got struck. So what I'm telling you is that sometimes what we believe to be reality isn't actual reality. In fact, I'm going to see here. I'm going to see if I have this quote handy. Yes, I got this quote. Many years ago, there was this guy called Dr. Stan Monteith. He always said this at the beginning of his show. He was an old guy, radio broadcaster. He died a couple years back. But this is how he always started his show. He always started this show with this quote, and I'm going to have to lean in so I can see it. This is what he said. bringing you the story behind the story, the news behind the news, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Christian civilization, it will be reality and not illusion or delusion that will determine what the future will bring. So his whole show, he brought out the reality, and he mentioned that it's usually scoffed at, and illusion is usually king. And this is actually what Candace Owens is talking about a lot in her thing. Now, the reason I started watching her was because I saw so many of my friends on the right talking about what a hateful, delusional anti-Semite that she is. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to watch her. I'm going to watch what she's saying. And I'm going to look at what she's talking about. And I'm not the only one. If you read the comments on her YouTube channel, you will see there are a lot of people who tuned in not because they want to see a train wreck, maybe some of them, but because some of them actually have an open mind and they want to listen to what people talk about. And listening, if you don't know, is actually the key to good relationships, people. Just saying. So here's what I discovered listening to her, and then also listening to Tucker Carlson, because I can't really stand him either. And I didn't really care when he left Fox News. I didn't care about any of that stuff, and I still don't. But here's what I've heard. I don't know where Candace stands about end times eschatology. Don't really care. It's my understanding she's Catholic. I think. I don't know for sure, because I haven't really looked into it. But here's what I've heard her say and what I've heard her call out. What she has called out is the war crimes that Benjamin Netanyahu has committed against people who are innocent Palestinians. This isn't her actually saying she worships Palestinians and believes everything that they do. It's not her talking about how she worships Islam or anything like that. This is her calling out something that's actually true. Now, maybe she's tied a, quote, so-called conspiracy theorist idea to it. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that she's actually right when it comes to Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not a peaceful, kind, sweet, loving man. If you look him up, and I've heard other Calvary Chapel pastors say this, actually former Calvary Chapel pastors say this. If you look this up, he has been tried. Netanyahu has been tried for crimes. Okay, he's not this innocent guy. And here's the other thing: Israel is not innocent. Israel is a nation in complete rebellion and wickedness towards God, completely. Now, me saying that, some people will go, "Oh, well, you're a hater of Israel." I'm not a hater of Israel. I'm a truth teller about Israel. And Israel is in a state of rebellion against God. They promote blatant homosexuality. They are completely wicked and immoral culturally. There's a reason a lot of people hate them. I believe a lot of it's a spiritual dark reason, but the bottom line is they're not a Christian nation. Now, here's the thing, though. In the last couple of decades, Christian Zionism, if you want to call it that, Messianic Judaism has actually exploded in Israel because a lot of the Jewish folks are finally receiving Jesus as their Messiah, which is a great thing. But if you look at the Bible and you actually understand the history of the Jewish people, the Jews have been in blatant rebellion against God forever. The whole reason the whole church is grafted in is because Israel's been disobedient, right? And there are people who say, well, as a Christian, you have to pledge 100 allegiance to God and bless Israel, blah, blah, etc., all this other stuff. And that is true, that the Old Testament teaches those who bless Israel will be blessed, okay? I agree with that, which is why I pray for the peace of Jerusalem, which is what we are told to do in Psalm 22, verse 6, Psalm 122, verse 6, okay? So I love Israel. I've been there. I consider myself a Messianic believer, even though I'm only this much Jewish. I I believe Israel is God's chosen people. But I also understand why the Jews are persecuted. And what I don't agree with is I don't agree that Israel today is being persecuted in the way that a lot of people claim, because they are simply disagreeing or calling out crimes that Benjamin Netanyahu is behind, right? Now, is it true that Israel gets attacked relentlessly? Yes, it is true, and that's wrong. And I would agree with that narrative when I hear people in the Christian media talking about, well, I can't believe that they're being attacked for no reason. It's true. In politically, they are in many ways. But the issue with Candace Owens, that isn't the issue. The issue that I've heard her talk about, and granted, it's only been about 2 months or so I've listened to her, but what I've heard her talk about is that Israel isn't being held accountable for the innocent people that they're killing, the innocent children that they're killing, okay? And the thing is we know that Israeli defense, just as American defense, is some of the highest and most pinpoint specificity. That's not the right word. Specificity. You know what I'm trying to say? I tried, people. I don't always get my words right. So let me take a drink of water. There we go. Okay. What I am going to say is that we know that the military, they can specify and pinpoint where they're going to drop stuff. Okay. Who knows what evil lurks in the minds of Netanyahu and Donald Trump and others, okay? All I know is that Candace Owens has stated things that are actually true, and she's being gaslit by the Christian right, okay? Now, I know some people would say, well, Stacey, you're full of baloney, and the Christian right is perfect in all their ways. And I'd be like, really? Because I've interviewed a lot of people on the Christian right for 20 years. Just saying. And over the 20 years that I was actively doing interviews with lots of people on the Christian right, which is about 1,500 interviews I did. So we're not talking 1 or 2. We're talking 1,500 plus interviews I did. Okay? That kind of makes me a little bit of an expert, not only as an interviewer, but of talking to people and being able to communicate and think clearly and reason and figure out things that are going wrong, right? Okay, just saying. The other thing I got to say and bring this up is that whether or not the information that Candace Owens is getting is legit or not, I don't know. I was just going to say I don't give a crap, but I'll just say it. I don't give a crap about all that stuff. What I care about is looking at the system, and I look at the fact that if you are a moderate, you're virtually killed in today's society. Now, I'm very conservative. I always have been. But if I actually were to say something like, you know what, I think we should pray for a homosexual man, I might all of a sudden be called a flaming liberal because I actually said that. Or maybe if I said, you know what, maybe we should go feed the poor, then all of a sudden to some Zionist wackos on the Christian right, they would go, well, I can't believe you're a social justice Nazi now. You know, it's like, where's the moderation? Where's the issue of being a moderate? It's like, give me a break. There is always a middle ground, and somebody is always going to attack you somewhere, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that I happen to know people personally that knew Charlie Kirk. I actually happen to know people that know Pastor Rob McCoy. And I've been told various things from certain people, and I look at that and I think, that's an interesting situation. So you can't always know what is actually legitimate. So I bring this all up because I want you to consider all sides. You know, my mentor, who I've absolutely loved for over 30 years, one thing that she taught me is to always look at the other side. And when you're a Christian apologist, that's exactly what you do. Janet Parshall taught me this, listening to her for many years. You always look at the other side and you learn it well enough to be able to argue against it if you're on the other side, right? So as an example, let's say you believe abortion is good. Then you are going to have to figure out where the pro-life arguments are so that you can argue against those if you actually believe in abortion. Same thing is true the opposite. If you're pro-life, learn the arguments against being pro-life. And then you can weigh the issues. And of course, what I have taught for some time is look at the scripture. What does that say, right? So what I find really sad about this whole situation, the whole media situation, is that there's so little of the Lord in it. That's what bothers me. That's why I try to focus that more on this channel than what I'm actually talking about right now. I'm just looking at the time here. I got 20 minutes here. Here's the other thing, though, about Candace Owens. I want to say that I appreciate that she's brought up, and I believe some are gaslighting her because of it. And that is that she's brought up the actual abuse within the Calvary Chapel churches. And, if you've watched most of my videos or you've been around this channel for any length of time, one of the things I started talking about months ago really, was I was talking about Daystar. I was talking about some of the other guys, John MacArthur. There's just so many, so many of these men who've been busted, who've sexually abused people and all this other stuff. And Calvary Chapel isn't innocent in this. They have scandals. Almost every church has scandals, but Calvary Chapel has been in the scandal world. So some of what she's talking about is completely legit. Now, whether or not it's tied to her big idea of what the big overall conspiracy is, that's yet to be seen. But it is not wrong ever to ask questions. And that's where I believe the gaslighting from the Christian right comes in, because it's like, well, wait a minute, since when is it a crime to actually ask questions? Frankly, that's what I do. That's what I have done for a living. I've interviewed people. In fact, you want to know who my very first guest was? You're going to laugh when you hear this, if you don't already know it. My very first guest that I ever interviewed was Frank Turek. I was one of the first people to interview him about his book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Now, when I saw that Frank Turek was involved in this TPUSA thing, I had a lot of things go through my mind, because I consider him a friend and I've interviewed him a number of times on my show in the past. And his reaction to what happened, there was a definite trauma response. But if you go back and you look at Donald Trump when he was shot on his ear, there was zero trauma response from him. And all of a sudden they set up this, they did this thing, and if you recall, Trump went out and he did this rally as in classic grandiose narcissist form, right? Now, and that's the other thing. You bring Trump up. It's like, okay, as a Christian, well, you either voted for Trump or you didn't, right? It's like, Trump is no angel. Just saying, people. He's not an angel. There are a lot of unanswered questions. I personally don't think that Tyler Robinson allegedly killed Charlie Kirk. I think there's too many unanswered questions. I think Candace Owens has brought a lot of them up. I think there's some interesting backlash from people who are uncomfortable with some of that. And I also think that there are people who don't like people asking questions. So my point today in making this video, and I have to kind of tighten this up because my husband has my dog upstairs. I heard him get him out of the tub. I had to put him in the tub because he was pacing, driving me crazy. And so anyway, long story short, my husband's got him. He's gone into a meeting and I need to go get him. Anyway, I bring all this up because part of developing healthy discernment and healthy relationships is learning to ask questions and to be open-minded and look at points of view that you don't think that you would actually agree with. I've had to learn to do this. I'm going to tell you, and I'm totally always transparent anyway, and those of you who know me forever, you know this. When I first started out doing what I did over 20 years ago, I was so far right that I believed everything that I was told. And it's not that it wasn't even real. It's just I trusted certain people, and they sorely let me down and hurt me big time. And then I learned lots of things through the political world and all this other stuff. I learned to eventually think on my own and weigh things. And the Bible talks about in Proverbs how, one side of the story seems true until you hear the other side. And that's what I'm talking about taking the time to hear the other side. Whether it's in a relationship that you're in marriage, whether it's a relationship you're trying to overcome or try to deal with, there is always more information to be found and always more understanding to be sought. And I think, frankly, a lot of people don't want to take the time to do that. That's why a lot of times people don't bother getting coaching or counseling or anything because, well, they figure their way is right and there's no other way to look at it. And I call those people narrow-minded because they are, because there's always a way to look at something new. And anybody who's been married for any length of time, I've been married over 33 years, if you've been married a very long time, then you've learned the art of listening and compromise, and you understand that it's not all or nothing. Things are never all or nothing. There's always middle ground. So in this scenario I'm bringing up with Candace, I'm sure she's wrong about some stuff, but what I've heard her say and what I watched her do is own things when she made a mistake, and I've also seen her vilified for nothing. And I could go on and on about that because because I've done so much research before I decided to do this video. So I wanted to share that today. And let me just again reiterate, I love Israel. I think Israel is God's chosen people. I support Israel. But I also believe that Netanyahu is evil. And I think that they're not perfect in all their ways. And they're in flat out disobedience and rebellion against God. And I don't think it's wrong to call it out. But some people on the Christian right do. And I think that's where Candace is being gaslit. And or maybe she's got some bad info coming her way. I don't know, but I think some of her info is legit. And I think other people think so too. And again, just going back to this quote from Dr. Stan Monteith. Again, I'm going to read you it because I think it's great. And I'll go ahead and I'll put it in my description. It says this: bringing you the story behind the story, the news behind the news, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Christian civilization, it will be reality and not illusion or delusion that will determine what the future will bring. Dr. Stan Monteith was a very brilliant man, and I had the opportunity to interview him actually. And one of the things I interviewed him about was the AIDS crisis. And one of the things that he shared, because he was a medical doctor, and he did the research. He actually dove into the research and looked at it. And what he discovered was that AIDS was a formulated vaccine intentionally targeted to hit the gay community and wipe them out. Okay? The way AIDS was marketed and brought before us in the 1980s when Oprah was, big, was that it was a gay disease only, blah, blah, blah. That actually wasn't. It was they intentionally targeted gay men to kill them. And that's actually a documented fact. You could find the research yourself and look it up. But that's not the narrative that most people know. And I'm going to tell you, the Lord's put me in a really weird spot because for over 20 years, I have shared things. I've called things out ahead of time. He's given me foresight that I know a lot of people don't have. I never understood that, frankly. But it's true. He's put very interesting, powerful people in my path that I've actually talked to. I mean, I've talked to people who are familiar with people in the deep state. I have talked to politicians. I have talked to people that are currently in the Trump administration, as well as previous other administrations. And I've determined myself that there is always a reason people do things, that doesn't even sound right, do things, whatever. Anyway, money is the motivator for a lot of people. And money talks in Washington, D.C., and it talks in the media. And when you and this is one of the things that drives me crazy. I actually heard somebody say this. Somebody I actually love and I respect actually made a comment that Candace Owens was using all this to make her money. Candace Owens is she's being a victim of law side, where she's being sued for things and maligned, I think wrongly. And TPUSA has brought in money hand over fist, and their books are very questionable. If you don't believe me, go look it up. You don't even have to watch Candace Owens. You can find plenty of people who are talking about this, okay? So, and that frankly is what makes what I do personally difficult, because I love people and I love helping people, especially people who've been hurt and abused in the church. That is one of my hardcore passions, is just to help that, and I was so maligned and bashed for 20 years about asking for money. Oh, all I do is care about money and blah, blah. You know what? It takes money to run a business. It takes money to run a nonprofit, and you need money to pay bills, right? And for some reason, it's not a problem for some people to make a lot of money, like TPUSA. But if Candace Owens wants to make money, all of a sudden she's a criminal. I'm sorry, but Candace Owens works hard and she deserves making money. I mean, we all do, right? Like I said, though, I would like to offer you coaching sessions just for the end of this month. If you're interested, email me at coachme@use.startmail.com. We can set up to 3 sessions, a donation of whatever you want to give to help me meet my year-end goal of $1 more thousand to hit 10,000 at the end of the year. And I know I have big dreams. I do. I'm not money motivated. That's part of the issue. Anyway, you email me and we'll set up some time to talk. And I have to tell you that if you want to just support Heart Tug, my ministry, go to hearttug.org/give and just donate if you don't want to do any coaching with me. You will bless other people and you'll actually bless me. And I think that's what it's about, right? Blessing one another, being reasonable in our discussions, in our talk, and, not being overreactive. And here's the thing. That's one of the things I teach people is stop overreacting. Be reasonable. Listen. Think. And if you need help regulating your emotions, that's what I can actually help you with, right? Because that's part of what's going on here that is really irritating to me, is like, all you people should be able to regulate your emotions and think clearly, but you can't, because it's nothing but arrows here and there. And, I heard somebody say, wouldn't it be nice if people actually just sat down at a table and talked and just shared an idea and respectfully disagreed without starting some flame war on social media? One of the things that I've heard the most from some of my younger clients in their 30s is that they wish social media didn't exist because they can't get a date. Hold on a second. Something happened. Okay. Nothing important, apparently. Anyway, they were talking about how, they can't get a date, that it's virtually impossible to connect with people because of the media and stuff. If you are my age or older, then don't take for granted the fact that you grew up without technology and you learn to communicate in a healthy way. Here's the other thing though. Don't negate asking questions, and don't negate people who ask questions. One of my favorite, well, I guess it's not a trait, but I guess what I've been told is of who I am. I'm curious. I've always been like a detective in everything that I do, whether it's examining my faith intimately and looking at what I believe and why, or it's looking at what I'm being told and asking why. It's never wrong to ask why. And I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to end it here. If you've ever been a victim of abuse and you've ever been told to be quiet and not tell anybody, you've been handled. And I was. I grew up in that situation. A very narcissistically abusive mother who handed me over to be abused by a male relative. And I was told to be quiet about it. And I was threatened. And it was only God's intervention in my life that actually delivered me from it. That situation, which was absolutely horrible and horrendous, and I spent a lot of years in therapy dealing with it. But if you've ever been told that, you've been told how to be, and you've been pressed down, and you've been told you can't talk about this because you don't have that right. When you learn to ask questions and think for yourself, that's the best power that you're ever gonna get and you will ever have, because nobody can take that away from you unless you willfully give it up. And that's frankly what makes me an outcast in my own family, because I exposed that family system. And I think in some ways that's what Candace Owens is trying to do. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes the Christian right doesn't do what they should, and that is actually tell the truth about certain things as well. So take that for what it's worth. And I hope that I get to hear from some of you, and I hope, say it with me, I hope you have a better day, people.